for being here today. We're going to start with bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions? Any bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on to approving the committee rules and the conferee rules. Everyone should have copies of these in your packet, and you've had the rules prior to today. So are there any comments on the committee rules or the conferee rules? Seeing none, I'll consider them approved. So now we will go on to continue our hearing from the Kansas Water Office. Let's go back to Luke. And I know you sent me an email about going over a couple things, so just do what you need to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so
No.
yesterday, again, Luke Drury, Senior Fiscal Analyst, Legislative Research. Yesterday, I was able to go through the budget summary with the committee. I would like to note on page 2 and 3 for items 4 and 5, as indicated yesterday, these are two newer funds that were created by the 2023 legislature. You'll see that increase in 2025 essentially as a result of, and it's noted in the narrative for the committee in the budget summary, that's a result of the agency not spending those available balances in those funds in 2020 and essentially carrying those into 2025. So in a way that somewhat looks like a reappropriation that the committee will be familiar with, or not necessarily all that dissimilar from what we saw in the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board as well for the consultant services. Unspent monies in 24 carrying into 25. The agency does estimate to spend those balances down in 24 and 25. And then, Madam Chair, I did want to mention for the committee as well the differences in the yellow sheet that the committee received from governor's differences from legislative budget recommendation. You'll see on there the state water plan fund enhancements that also include which new lines of appropriation they would be go towards in the governor's recommendation. And then in addition to that, the agency did request 2 enhancement requests, while the governor did not recommend, which is similar to the LBC position, no funding for it. The governor does recommend adding the 2 FTE positions with no additional funding being attached to that. So, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions that the committee may have, or I do know that Victoria Ashbury with the Water Office is with us in committee today, and she may be able to address the committee and answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Luke. I need to find my yellow governor's budget page.
It's blue.
Yeah, I don't have my water budget.
That?
No, not the big one. This one.
Little blue, like the Little Blue River? Yeah. Okay. Committee, questions for Luke on the 2025 water budget? Okay. You want to go over 2026 right away, Luke? And then we can have the agency answer questions.
Yeah, absolutely, Madam Chair. Yeah, so we can continue on then to fiscal year 2026. That figure 7 highlights or shows those individual lines and then the corresponding narrative down below. As mentioned earlier, the agency did request a couple of enhancements, including some FTE positions to go with that. The Legislative Budget Committee, through the global recommendation, did delete those. You will also see some monies for some FEMA federal grants that are estimated to continue into 2026. Increased requests for state water plan fund appropriations, again, spread across those 5 new lines of appropriation. You'll see the deletions from the Water Projects Grant and Water Technical Assistance Fund. That is essentially because, Madam Chair, the legislature appropriated an additional $7.5 and $2.5 million to those funds from the State Water Plan Fund for fiscal year 2025. That essentially shows that the agency is estimating spending those dollars in 25 and not carrying them forward into 26. The 2023 Senate sub for House Bill 2302 did, is that the correct? I'm making sure here. Yes, they still have some statutory transfers. Those 7.5 and $2.5 million are in addition to those statutes already, or excuse me, those transfers set in statute. SGF allocations, item 7, that is for some increased estimates for capers and group health insurance costs. And then all other adjustments are mostly attributable to contracts related to the Corps of Engineers for different maintenance and whatnot the Corps provides. Madam Chair, I would then finally note for the committee on your final page, which is page 9 of the budget summary, it shows you the 10-year reference table. You will notice there in 2022, jump out the page at you a little bit in regard to the numbers, SGF and all funds. That would be related to some water service debts that were retired in that fiscal year. And then the FTEs and expenditures by program. And I would be happy to stand for any more questions that the committee may have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Luke. Committee, questions on 26? Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm catching up, but what are the FTEs on the number 9 on page 8? There were 8.1 FTEs that was deleted by the LBC. Can you tell me what those were, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative, on page number 5 and number 6 of the budget summary, those 2 FTE positions that were deleted correspond with the agency's enhancement request for funding for a water resource planner and a position for water conservation support.
Thank you, Luke.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Luke, if you would like to introduce agency staff.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Yes, Victoria Ashbury with the Water Office. She is the Policy and Government Relations Manager. I do believe that she will be addressing the committee.
Victoria, welcome to committee.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Asbury. I am the Policy and Government Relations Manager for the Kansas Water Office. And today I'll be presenting to you from our budget overview that looks like this. You should have received it yesterday, so it might be in your folder if it's not right in front of you. And I'll give everyone just a second to find that. Okay, so opening up to page 1 on our budget overview, you'll find our agency overview. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Kansas Water Office is the planning, policy, and coordination agency for the state of Kansas. To the right of that page, you'll see that we are requesting 26 positions for fiscal year 2026, 5 FTEs and 1 non-FTE. Underneath the blue box on that page, you'll see our 2 programs listed, the Water Planning and Implementation Program and the Public Water Supply Program. At the very bottom of the page, you'll see the budget for both of those programs as well as our agency as a whole, but I'm going to talk about each of those programs individually, so we'll get into more detail in later pages. Moving on to page 2. On page 2 starts our Water Planning and Implementation Program. This program is charged with, among other things, developing the state water plan and coordinating water resource operations for agencies at all levels of government. In the middle of page 2, you'll see a list of funds that's utilized by the Water Planning and Implementation Program. Starting first with the State General Fund. The Kansas Water Office receives about $1 million each year from the State General Fund. Underneath that is the State Water Plan Fund. The Kansas Water Office usually receives about $10 or $11 million each year from the State Water Plan Fund. That number that you see in front of you is a little bit inflated. You've seen, you've heard Luke mention House Bill 2302 that was allocate an additional $18 million to the State Water Plan Fund each year. For fiscal year 2024, the entirety of that $18 million was appropriated to the Kansas Water Office and then transferred out to other water-related agencies. And you can see that transfer amount in that middle column there. So in future years, the Kansas Water Office won't receive that entire $18 million. The funds will be directly appropriated to all water agencies, so we won't have to do those transfers for fiscal year 2026. On page 3, you'll see our 2 state general fund enhancement requests. The first is a water resource planner. This position would coordinate on planning, projects, grants, and other engagement with the Kansas Water Authority, state agencies, federal agencies, and regional advisory committees. And just to flag that regional advisory committee engagement for you, if you're not aware, we have 14 regional advisory committees in the state. These are volunteers that provide on-the-ground local input on water issues in their region. And this engagement has increased in the past year while we've held public input meetings, and will only continue to increase as we move toward establishing a 10-year water program where public input is really vital during that process. So increasing that staff would allow that engagement to continue. Our second state general fund enhancement is for water conservation support. This position would assist water users in adopting practices to address the depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer, as well as other at-risk water resources in Kansas. In the past year, the Kansas Water Office has increased our partnership with producers, irrigators, municipalities to implement practices that reduce use while still maintaining profitability. We currently have 1 staff member who engages in these partnerships for all of Western Kansas, so additional staff would further support and increase these partnerships. Moving on to page 4. On page 4 discusses the Kansas Water Authority. The Kansas Water Authority is our advisory board. They're charged with advising the governor and the legislature advising the governor and the legislature on water policy issues, approving the Kansas Water Plan, public water supply contracts, and then also making recommendations for how the State Water Plan Fund should be spent. You heard about the State Water Plan Fund yesterday, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in future pages. Page 5 are those regional advisory committees that I just mentioned in relation to our water resources planner, and you can see a map of our regional planning areas. Moving on to page 6. Pages 6 and 7 is information on the State Water Plan Fund that you heard about yesterday. If you need a refresher on the revenue that comes into the State Water Plan Fund, you can find that on these pages. On page 8 starts information on the Kansas Water Office's portion of the State Water Plan Fund. As you heard yesterday, the State Water Plan Fund is a shared fund, meaning it goes to multiple agencies, and so these pages discuss the Water Office's portion of the State Water Plan Fund. Page 9 talks about the new budget framework that state agencies will be utilizing, the 5 guiding principle categories, and then as well underneath each of those, the existing projects and programs that now fall under those categories. The Kansas Water Office and all water-related agencies will still be able to provide reporting on those existing projects and programs, even under the new budget framework. And this, for the Water Office, starts with this document. Moving on to page 10. Page 10 discusses the governor's recommendations for the State Water Plan Fund. Towards the bottom of that page, you'll see the governor's recommended $6.3 million from the State Water Plan Fund for enhancements to the Kansas Water Office, including $2.75 million for water planning and project development, $3 million for in-lake sediment management, and $550,000 for independent program accountability and evaluation. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. The next set of pages includes information on each of the Kansas Water Office's projects and programs, both by new guiding principle category and the previous program name. So for instance, on page 11, at the top, you'll see water quality, so that's that new guiding principle category. And then the blue box directly underneath that is water quality partnership, so the existing name of the program. And then the page contains information on that program. I'm not going to walk through every project and program that the Water Office has under the State Water Plan Fund, but I do want to flag the ones for you where the governor has made enhancement recommendations. So we're going to move to page 16. Yep, and I'll give everyone just a second to find page 16. On page 16, under the new reservoir guiding principle category is the In-Lake Sediment Management Initiative. The governor has recommended $3 million for this new initiative, and I do want to point out to the committee that this new program is entirely enhancement funded, meaning there is no money in the base or in the LBC recommendations currently. This is all enhancement funding recommended by the governor. There are two paths for this funding for this In-Lake Sediment Management Initiative. The first would be establishing a hydrosuction pilot at John Redmond Reservoir. This would be a partnership with the Corps to address sediment issues in John Redmond. If a hydrosuction pilot is not feasible within the first fiscal year to be initiated at the very least, the Water Office would use that funding to begin feasibility studies at reservoirs. These studies would include assessment of current sediment management options, technologies that could be used to address sediment issues in each reservoir, and creation of a long-term sediment management plan for each reservoir. These long-term sediment management plans are essential for extending the life of our reservoirs. So I'm going to jump to page 19 now. On page 19, under the new Research and Education Guiding Principle category is an independent program evaluation initiative. The governor has recommended $910,000 total for this program. That's $360,000 in the base or currently included in the LBC recommendation, and enhancement funding of $550,000. This program is being established thanks to feedback that we heard from Kansans during our series of public input meetings this summer. Before launching a 10-year water program, Kansans want to be sure that the programs and projects that we're currently implementing are efficient and effective. So do those programs work well? Are they addressing Kansas water plan goals and issues? And are there any changes to those programs needed in order to make them more efficient and effective? So this funding would be used to begin that evaluation process of existing projects and programs. I'm going to jump all the way to page 23. And again, the pages that I'm skipping are other state water plan fund projects and programs. So if you're ever interested in a specific project and program, that information is there. On page 23, under the new resiliency budgeting category is water planning and project development. The governor has recommended $3.75 million. That includes $1 million in the base or in the LBC recommendations and $2.75 million in enhancement funding. This program is that long-term water supply planning that Vijay touched on yesterday, that basin by basin or region by region, big picture look at water issues, and starting with areas estimated to have less than 50 years of usable life left, to create a project pipeline to address water issues in that region. So this funding would begin that long-term planning in high priority regions. So I'm going to skip a few more pages to page 28. Page 28 is actually our second program, so everything I've talked about so far fell under our first program, the Water Planning and Implementation Program. Page 28 begins our Public Water Supply Program, our second program. In the middle of that page, you'll see a list of funds utilized by the program, primarily the Water Marketing Fund. And then at the bottom of page 29, you'll see the expenditures typically experienced by the Public Water Supply Program, primarily operation and maintenance of our federal reservoirs and principal and interest to the Corps of Engineers. The rest of the document is more information on our Public Water Supply Program, but I will stop there and stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Victoria. Questions, committee? Representative Roth.
On page 16, is that money the same that the Department of Agriculture talked to us about, that suction thing, the sediment suction program?
So Vijay touched on it yesterday, but it falls under the Kansas Water Office, not the Department of Agriculture's budget.
Okay, I thought we had something about dams and water and sediment in Department of Ag. So, okay.
I believe that was dam inspection they were
Well,
asking.
yeah, I got dam inspection, but there were, but some, okay, thank you, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Victoria, thanks. Before we look at the enhancements, let's look here. I'm just curious on the, like 26, the adjustments, almost $1 million. The Army Corps changes, explain that, what that means? It's on page 7 of the budget document, number 8. Does that have to do with some of the WORDA stuff, or?
Sure. So that's primarily, so our operation and maintenance costs change every year. The Corps gives us an estimate, and sometimes it's close and sometimes it's not. So we always build in additional cushion in case it's higher than we expect. So we're increasing that amount just in case.
Madam Chair, if I can continue. Okay, so, and maybe Director might be able to answer this too. Is it based on how much water we have in storage, or is it just kind of a guesstimate as we start the year, and then I don't want to get in the weeds too deep. I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, or maybe the better question is, what's the average? Is it 600, 700,000? I mean, I know inflation has some tendency, or I'm just, if we can have at least a little bit of a breakout, that'd be great.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to
Appreciate it.
provide that. Yeah, absolutely.
Committee, any other questions? Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, and
Vice
I
Chair.
hate to do this. I just want to make sure, there's a lot of things in this building floating around about water. So when we look at these enhancements for the state water plan, will those come out of this committee? Will those recommendations come out of this committee, or will it come directly from appropriations or from the water committee going into approps? Do we know?
There's nothing barring us from making these recommendations that they're asking for. And before we get out of here, I want to have a list from the water of all of them, because they're scattered throughout this booklet, and I would like a total list of the description and the amount over and above this base budget that has been approved by LBC.
Thank you.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative was asking about the number 8 on page 7, and it's special revenue funds. So is that not SGF, right? You're saying yes, it's not. right?
Correct, it is not SGF.
So, and the LBC did recommend no change, which means it was approved there. So special revenue and, yeah, okay. I just want to be clear, it's the first time I've seen that term this year. Bye.
Committee questions? Any further questions? Representative Rogers, that's why we're here, to ask
Okay.
questions.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm just, again, this is a new committee for me, if you can believe that, as old as I am. This blue sheet, and this probably should have come back, we were doing okay. As it says, State Water Plan Fund, 24 actuals, 25 LBC, and then the 26 regs. So is this kind of what you're looking for, or are you looking for a more detail? Because it looks like we had 22 million through KDA, 10 million through the water office, KDHE 5.6. I know I know that's throwing a lot of different things together, but you're wanting a bigger breakdown, right, on the state water plan funds, and you want to maybe attack those one by one. Is that what you're telling us?
Right now, I'm just focused on the Kansas Water Office and the enhancements that they have asked for.
Okay.
To just, I mean, we'll address the department of ag when that comes.
That's fine.
I mean, yeah, water, water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Yeah, I just want to be straight on which budgets are focusing on which enhancements. We need to know that.
Not a problem.
That was my question, because we have some, there's some gray areas. I want to make sure we're either not double funding them or ignoring them because we think the other budget has it. It's more of a matter of process is why I'm asking. Thank you.
That's my understanding, is that we're going to focus on each agency and their water requests, and we need a specific list from each agency about those water requests, so we're not doubling up anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
Anyone else? Representative Roth.
Thank you, Chairman. So when I'm looking at the long blue sheet, it's got water quality, aquifer, resiliency, reservoirs, research and education on Department of Ag, on the Kansas Water Office. They've got water quality on Department of and resiliency on health and environment. So are each one of those asking for X amount of money for the same thing?
Dylan, Luke, could you address that, please? Because it
Yes.
looks like there are the same type of requests out of those same buckets out of each committee.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. To answer the representative's question, let me go to page. So you'll see here on page 6, item number 4, it will speak to that a bit. And that is to say that the Kansas Water Office produced a publication that's on their website, approved FY 2026 KWA budget packet. As part of the, and VJ talked about this a little bit the other day, as part of the water offices and water authorities strategic planning across the state. As a result of that and the planning and strategic processes, it's been the recommendation to move those traditional lines of appropriation. And that's why you'll see more lines of appropriation under each agency for 24 and 25 than what you do in 26. And that is a result of it's a result of that strategic planning, that budget packet that the agencies went through that exercise over the summer and fall. Does that help to answer the question, Chair?
I believe so, but I want to read back to you how I interpret that. On page 6 of our budget summary, number 4, on the second line, the water quality is 1.5 million. And if you look at the Kansas Water Office, they're at 1.5. And then the water quantity ask is 2 million. The resiliency is 2.4 million. The reservoirs are 1.5, and the research and education is 2.8. And according to the way I read this, LBC has accepted those numbers.
That would be correct, Madam Chair. The LBC made no change to that part of the agency's request, and so that is the starting point. And then with that being said, then in the appropriations bill, you will notice where, for example, we'll use, since we're on the water office, we'll use them as an example. That first line, assessment and evaluation, would no longer exist in the appropriations bill. And then instead you would see water quality, water quantity,
Right.
/ aquifer, resiliency, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Representative Roth had a question, I believe.
I think you answered my question, and if you turn the page, so the water plan fund distributes these monies to each of the agencies. Is that correct? So when you turn the long blue page over, it says water quality, 26 LBC Rec, $10,280,081. And so then if you go back to water quality for ag, water office, health and environment, Division of Health, Wildlife and Parks, and University, then that's what's on the second page total. And then all those funds are distributed from that 10 million. Each agency is listed out there. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Representative, that is essentially correct. I would just note that the back page that you are noticing, for example, the 10.2 for water quality, that is simply an aggregation of all those water quality lines listed above. So not necessarily that the way that the state budgeting works in the appropriations bill is going agency by agency, line of appropriation. So that is to say, taking each agency's line of appropriation and adding that together, as opposed to taking the 10 million aggregated and then pushing it out. So that number is an aggregation of all those water quality initiatives throughout all state agencies, water quantity aquifer initiatives across all agencies. I hope that makes sense, but you are correct in getting at how those numbers are gotten to.
So these are the totals of all agencies, rather than that much money has been decided to be divvied out and then that will be decided later. This is a summation.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Representative Rogers and then Representative Carlin.
Okay, sorry. Just helping the guy on the end here. And again, not to belabor this, but, I've been in other meetings looking at, 7.5% cut. Did you guys look at a 7.5% reduction? What would that mean?
We did. Thank you for that question. So for the Kansas Water Office, a 7.5% reduction to our state general fund expenditures is about $105,000. 83% of our SGF expenditures go towards salaries and wages. The remaining 17%, if you were curious, goes under what we call agency operations. So everything you can imagine to run a state agency. So whether it's rent or OITS, things like that. Then we also use our SGF for our Kansas Water Authority members, so paying their per diem as board members and their travel and things like that. So all of that to say that because the majority of our SGF is allocated for salaries and wages, in order to reach that 7.5% reduction, we would have to hold open a vacant position. Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, other questions for the water folks today? Luke, do you have anything more to add?
I do not, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much for appearing, and we will close the hearing on the Kansas Water Office and open the hearing on Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Luke, if you would take us through that budget, if we give everybody a second to find those papers.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I would note, as you all are getting your packets, that the Division of Environment, and I would note before we dive in here, this is specifically the budget summary in front of you all is for the Division of Environment underneath the umbrella of the entirety of KDHE. This is just the environment section. The health section is heard in a different committee. With that being said, I would note that KDHE does have Allie Denning with us today, who will be able to answer any questions the committee may have and also address the committee. Madam Chair, if I may, I will begin the presentation on page number 2 with the 2025 analysis. So Figure 4, again, I will point out for the committee, and that shows those individual lines along with narrative explanations down below. Number 1, general fund reappropriations. The Division of Environment does utilize general fund, and the agency did have some reappropriations of about $235,000 roll from 24 into 25. Item number 2, state water plan fund reappropriation. As discussed earlier, these are our water agencies, or those agencies that utilize state water plan fund. They also have $5.6 million in unspent water plan fund monies rolling from 24 into 25. Item number 3 is a supplemental request submitted by the Division of Environment. That request is for $350,000 general fund for the Bureau of Waste Management. The program is federally delegated and typically supported by federal grants and fee funds, and this is at the beginning of page 3. However, the agency has noted that annual federal rewards for the program have been declining, and the program is collecting less in fees. The reduction of those federal funds and fee funds, along with the rising cost, has caused an immediate shortfall for that program, and therefore the agency's request is for $350,000 general fund to help stabilize the fund. With that being said, Madam Chair, you will note LBC did delete that enhancement as part, or excuse me, supplemental as part of the global adjustment. Item number 4 are agency trust funds. That would include an increase of $7.8 million. More specifically, these are for remedial actions at different contaminated sites for above ground and underground petroleum storage tanks. And then also some increasing expenditures from the Kansas Public Water Supply loans in 2025. Item number 5 are other federal funds. So specifically, this is federal funds that do not include ARPA monies. That would be an addition of $2.7 million from federal funds. That is mostly attributable to increased expenditures for contractual services. For example, and more specifically too, the agency is estimating some increased expenditures relating to the Brownfields program. You will also noted is some estimated increases for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Fund from the agency. Madam Chair, when you flip over to page 4, beginning at the top of that, item number 6 are American Rescue Plan Act funds, ARPA dollars. The agency's revised request for 25 does delete $4.9 million from that. The State Finance Council had approved about $374 million in discretionary ARPA funds, statewide expenditures. That was in December of 2022. As part of that approval, the Division of Environment was awarded $10 million in ARPA funds that would be used to provide grants for technical assistance in drinking water and sewage systems, specifically for small towns. That was originally planned, the agency had originally planned to spend $5 million in 24 and $5 million in 25. However, in 24, the agency expended $9.9 million of that. So therefore, that reduction is really a result of expending the dollars quicker than originally estimated. Essentially, that $10 million was spent in 24 with nothing rolling into 25. Item number 7 on page 4 is all other adjustments. And Madam Chair, I did hear the shout out and calling all their adjustments rats and cats and appropriations this morning. As you all do know, I do call those rats and cats. So those are those items that are not previously discussed above. And that includes a deletion of about $128,000 all from agency fee funds. The agency is also adding 8.1 FTE positions across all agency programs. And Madam Chair, you will see those FTE adjustments. They're broken down by program as well. Madam Chair, I can stand for questions or I can move forward into FY 2026.
Thank you, Luke. Questions from the committee on 25? I have one. So number 3, the hazardous waste fund stabilization. LBC deleted that. Can that expense come out of number 2, the $5.6 million that the agency's carrying over? Can they use some of that money to fix that problem?
Madam Chair, I would note that the blue table that we had discussed earlier with the water plan office, excuse me, with the state water plan fund, that shows those lines of appropriation for each agency. I don't have the list of how much was rolled over by each line of appropriation within KDHE. I can't speak to whether or not that would be allowable. I can certainly look into that, or the agency may be able to provide some clarification on that as well. I would note, though, that the majority of state water plan fund expenditures do go out typically in regard to expenditures either for contractual service expenditures or as aid to either conservation districts, other municipalities, things of that nature. So not necessarily a revenue transfer for revenue shortfalls.
Okay, thank you. If you could look into that and find out, I was just wondering, I mean, that's $5.5 million. If they could take out 350,000 to fix their hazardous waste thing, then I could see why LBC would delete that. So, any other questions on 2025? If not, let's go to 2026.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That begins on page 5 of your budget summary. Excuse me. And then I'll start off with item number 1. The agency did submit several enhancement requests for 2026. So item number 1 is livestock waste management. The agency's request includes a $210,000 general fund for livestock waste management. This is a same request that was approved by the 2024 legislature for 2025. The agency then is essentially requesting that general fund continue on into FY 2026 as it is currently in their budget for 2025. Item number 2 is that hazardous waste fund stabilization. This is the same request as listed above for the current year. So the agency also requests for $350,000 general fund for the hazardous waste fund stabilization in FY 2026. Item number 3 is the KEAMS database implementation. The agency's request is for $425,000 general fund one time to integrate KEAMS with perceptive content in 2026. Item number 4, state general fund reductions. That is at the bottom of page 6 and carries over onto page 7. So whereas we had spoken about the livestock waste management item above in item number 1, the agency requests that as a supplemental request because, as you will see, the decrease is primarily in other general fund reductions is attributable to small town infrastructure and livestock waste management. So beginning on the top of page 7, in 2024, the 2024 legislature had added 16 million general fund for small town infrastructure. As we discussed earlier, that was in addition to the $10 million from ARPA that was put in for small town infrastructure. And the 2024 legislature also approved the $210,000 general fund for livestock waste management. At that point in time, those appropriations were done as one time. And so therefore, that's why you see a reduction of a total of 16.2 million. That's mostly attributable to small town infrastructure one-time general fund appropriations, and then $210,000 for livestock waste management for one-time expenditures in 2025 as well. But as noted before, that livestock waste management, the agency does request that again in 2026. Item number 5, state water plan fund reductions. That deletes 2.2 million from the state water plan fund, and that is across all different accounts. And that is similar to all other agencies that utilize the state water plan. The agency's request also collapses some of those legacy line items or lines of appropriation into those newer requested lines of appropriation moving forward. Item number 6 is American Rescue Plan Act fund reductions. That's a deletion of $5 million. Again, as noted above, that is simply because the agency expended those monies in 2024. They don't have any monies in 25, very little, 61,000. And again, that is a one-time deal for the ARPA funds, and so therefore you see that deletion of 5 million. Madam Chair, when you flip over onto page 8, item number 7 is agency trust funds. As discussed in the FY 2025 analysis, the agency does estimate expending some additional dollars from agency trust funds in 25 and in 26. That's also attributable to the above ground and underground petroleum storage tank release funds, and also related to the Kansas Public Water Supply loans. Item number 8, other federal funds. So these are funds that exclude those ARPA dollars that were discussed above. The agency's request does include $2.7 million federal funds. And as discussed in 25, those expenditures also relate to the Brownfields program, also to the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Fund, and mostly attributable to contractual service expenditures of those federal funds. Madam Chair, the balance then of the changes in the agency's request in 26, item number 9, all other adjustments, our rats and our cats, that's about $11,000. That's all from agency fee funds. They also add 8.1 FTE positions. Again, the breakdown of those additions by program are listed there for the committee. Finally, Madam Chair, I would note when you flip over to the back page or page number 9, that includes your standard reference tables going back to fiscal year 2017. They also shows the expenditures by program in figure 9, FTEs by program in figure 10. Madam Chair, I would be happy to stand for questions, or as indicated earlier, Allie Denning with KDHE is here with us today, and she can address the committee at this time.
Thank you, Luke. Questions on 2026? So I have a question on number 4, the SGF reductions, small town infrastructure program and the livestock waste management. Could you expand on that just a little bit? I mean, is everybody okay with not having these services?
As indicated, Madam Chair, those were, to my understanding, approved and put into the budget as specifically one time.
Okay.
And so therefore are not part of the agency's allocations or base budget request. And since they were deemed at that time to be appropriated for one time, they are backed out in 2026. I would note though, and similar to the water office, the amount of requests that both the water office and the Division of Environment receive for different water projects and for KDHE environment, the small town infrastructure does outpace the available fundings for that. But again, the approvals or the appropriations at that point in time were done one time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I missed the one-time phrase that I'm sure you put in there. Also on, where did I see that? What's the Brownfields program?
Madam Chair, I would defer to KDHE to give you
Okay.
more detail in regard to that.
Okay. Anyone else have questions on 2026? Okay, thank you, Luke. And now we'll let the agency speak. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Chair Mosier and members of the committee. My name is Kate Gleason. I am the, sorry, should I talk louder? It's kind of far from my face. So. My name is Kate Gleason. I'm the Deputy Director of Environment for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. We also have our Secretary Janet Stanek here today and Director Henning if there are any questions that are outside of my pay grade. But while we look for the PowerPoint, I'll just get started because a lot of it is background on our agency, and we just wanted to run through that really quickly for you anyway, and you have it in front of you. So I'll run through that, and then we can get into the meat of the budget items. Yes, that one with the mine's not in color, but with the leaf on the front. So you can flip to the second page. That just shows our org chart. The Division of Environment is one of 3 divisions in the agency, Public Health and Healthcare Finance being the other 2. And they present their budgets separately. So on the next slide, it shows our agency mission: protect and improve the health and environment of all Kansans. For the Division of Environment, this really means we look at air, soil, and water. Those are our 3 areas we're focused on. On the next slide, it shows some, but not all, of the federal laws we've been delegated by this legislature and the governor to enact in Kansas. They go to the same 3 media: soil, air, and water. And you'll see some, I'm sure you've all heard of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, all of that. So we were delegated those laws to enforce here in the state. On the next slide, you'll see a horizontal org chart of our division. We have 5 bureaus, and I'm going to go through those all a little bit more in a few slides. So that just gives you a sense of how we're structured. The next slide shows our staff and distribution across the state, I guess you would say. Most of our staff are housed here in Topeka, across the street. And then we have district offices in Hayes, Salina, Lawrence, Chanute, Wichita, and Dodge. Dodge has a satellite office in Ulysses that does some livestock work for us that just is a cost-effective way for us to get around the whole state. And then we have a few folks at Frontenac that do our surface mining program. The next slide, we'll start getting into the bureaus. The first we have here is the Bureau of Air. They handle, air emissions. It's pretty self-explanatory. And so we do operating permits, construction permits for new development and things like that. And then that program also houses lead and asbestos for the state. So. On the next slide, we have the Bureau of Environmental Remediation. This one I might go in a little bit more depth on. This is the site that or the bureau that oversees contaminated sites in the state. And there are a lot of different, stripes on this one. We have the storage tanks, which are gas stations. We regulate those, and we have the trust fund for cleanup of contaminated sites that result from leaking storage tanks. We also we partner with, or we're delegated to oversee some of the Superfund sites that start with EPA. We also have we have a voluntary cleanup program and an enforcement-based cleanup program for other contaminated sites that are usually tied to historical contamination across the state. And we have 144 or so orphan sites, which, as Vijay mentioned yesterday, are sites where there is no quote-unquote culprit for the contamination that we can get to anymore. So those are a state liability at this point. We also have, I will talk about brownfields a little bit since you had a question about that. That's a redevelopment program that we do that helps folks assess brownfield. Brownfields is what you would call a contaminated site, or one that, is not a green, there's green fields, which go out to a pasture, it's new, no one's ever built anything there. This is a former industrial site, most likely, and those have to be investigated and potentially remediated before they can be redeveloped. And so that program helps folks fund those investigations and the work that needs to be done to allow redevelopment. We also have now in our state, as of a few years ago, we have a certificate of environmental liability release program. It's quite a mouthful. We call it the Sealer program. And that allows folks who have clean hands to come in and get that certificate so they can redevelop without the specter of some sort of enforcement action happening for them on the liability of the cleanup site. So, and this bureau also has our mining group. So the next, and should I point this somewhere? Yeah, there, that worked. Okay. Bureau of Waste Management does, I think, what's in the name. It's what's on the tin. The landfills, and then we also regulate hazardous waste facilities, which this program that does hazardous waste facilities is the subject of that enhancement that you've already heard about, that industrial facilities that handle hazardous waste or generate hazardous waste, those types of things. The next bureau is Field Services, and they do a few things that are kind of different. They house our district offices that do our inspections and compliance assistant, that field phone calls from the public or whoever about complaints they may have. We do more than 2,000 inspections a year. For the other programs that you hear about here, water, the water program, blah, 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 air, not blah, 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 but there's a lot of them, so I don't want to list them all. This bureau also houses the livestock facility, watershed restoration and protection, and they help locals with protection of local groundwater supply. And last but not least, we have our Bureau of Water. Oh, I went too far. See, we permit and oversee more than 950 public water supplies in the state. That includes municipalities, rural water districts, and the like. That's the real meat on the bone of what this bureau does. But they also oversee wastewater treatment plants. They do surface water quality, and they oversee the state revolving loan fund, which you've maybe heard about. But we executed $400 million in loan agreements for drinking and wastewater infrastructure this fiscal year. Or last fiscal year, I guess, because this one's not done yet, so we don't have that number. But we have a little bit more information on that on a later slide, but that is a major part of what this bureau is doing. The next slide shows, in addition to the state funding we get and the sort of automatic grants that we get from EPA for our core functions, we're always going out and trying to get additional federal dollars as they're available. And this is just a highlight of some of them. Some money we got for watershed restoration, soil health, solid waste, to address recycling rates, because landfill capacity is certainly an issue in the state, as you may have heard. Diesel emissions helps replace old buses. It says school buses here, but that also includes city buses and things like that. And then we have applied for $47 million in federal funding for emerging contaminants like PFAS and things to pass along to local municipalities, because there's new federal rules require testing for PFAS and may require them to install new treatment to get PFAS out if they do have PFAS issues. So hopefully we'll get that. Then this slide shows some of the bill funding we've gotten related to water already. We got a total of more than $400 million for 5 fiscal years for our SRF fund, that revolving loan fund, that allowed us to do a lot more principal forgiveness for folks who applied for it. It allowed us to do some work on some more emerging contaminants, the lead and copper rule, things like that. So that's kind of some exciting news. And then we get to the enhancements on the next slide. And I'm sorry for whipping through this. Of course, if you guys have questions, please let me know. But it's just a lot to cover. So we have 2 buckets, as you've kind of already, I think, pieced together, right? We have our SGF enhancement requests, and then we have the water implementation request. So first I want to go over the SGF enhancement request. The first one is that hazardous waste fund stabilization. Now, I don't know if you guys, I know you guys have a lot of papers in front of you, but there is one I brought in today to show a little bit better of what exactly we're talking about. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. Well, it has a chart that shows money going down, and I'm having trouble. This one? That's the one, thank you. So you'll see, fumbling here, but you'll see that that shows the receipts, the expenditures from the hazardous waste fee fund, and the overall balance is that gray polygon that's, not in great shape. So that fund that program is funded half by an EPA grant, which has not gone up in years, and we expect to go down in the near future. And the other half of it really is fee funds. Now we've held off because you'll see a little bit of until a couple years ago, a little bit of the up and down And that is when we were hoping it would keep going up and down a little bit and stay steady. We didn't want to increase fees. Now we've started a package to increase fees because I think the writing is on the wall here as far as where this fund is going. But to bridge that gap, right, because the regulations process takes a while. We've got our stakeholder groups together. We're working through it. That's why we've come in with this enhancement request. So this just bridges the gap to allow us to fund that program through the end of 2020. So it would be the end of fiscal year 2026. And by then we'll have the regs in place and hopefully we'll start collecting a higher fee permit rate. The second is our Kansas Environmental Information Management System, or we call it affectionately KEAMS, enhancement request. It's a one-time request for $425,000. This is money that the agency will spend eventually to accomplish certain things in the system, right? We're trying to get it towards finalization. We've been rolling it out for a few years, but this money will allow us to accelerate the rate at which we're doing this work. It's a database that we use both internally and it's external facing for the regulated community. And this would allow us to really like amp up our contractors' time spent on it and get certain things done that would move it towards a more beneficial product for everyone. And then the third SGF enhancement request is $210,000 for livestock staffing. I think Luke explained that really well. We've had that money for a few years, and it was supported by our stakeholders, and it allows us to contract out some engineering to keep the permitting backlog down in that program. And the rest of that program's money is almost exclusively SGF, I think, so it is one of the only ways for us to get money to support that. Now, the other four enhancement requests here are the water implementation framework enhancement requests. The top one, rural and private groundwater protection for $500,000. You've seen in this packet already in this presentation, there are a lot of resources for public water supply. Where we don't have resources, and we've seen this as an agency for years, are on private domestic wells and private septic systems. This is a program we started with 2302 money last year, and we are granting it out to counties for them to reach out to their residents and help them upgrade their septic systems, repair, replacement, and testing of private wells, so folks can find out if they have issues with their private water supply. Second is the RAPS program, the watershed program enhancement of $1 million. This amount is going to allow us to get into more watersheds to do more of this work. I think that one's pretty straightforward, but if you have any questions, I'm here. And then the contamination remediation for $1 million, that goes to those orphan sites that have no culprit. It allows us to work on that backlog also, because as we get through those sites, you know, it's just more protection of groundwater, because a lot of those sites go to groundwater contamination. And then the last on this list is the district engineer program. You'll see on that one pager that I handed out, the second thing is a map. That map shows Southeast Kansas has many wholesale districts, you can see. That we think that is evidence because of why this money would be so beneficial, because we had a district engineer in our Southeast district office who went to these meetings, who got involved in the day-to-day work of municipalities and was a liaison between them and our agency, and really allowed them to get their foot in the door on infrastructure projects and encourage regionalization. So this is a proposal we have to add 6 district engineers, 1 in each of our district offices, so that they can do the same thing across the state. It allows us to encourage regionalization and long-term planning, which there are a lot of benefits to. So those are our enhancements. I think the rest of the slide I'll go through really quickly since I've already taken so much time. And I know I've said that before, but I'll really try now. Accomplishments. We got federal money out, we got state money out, we helped a lot of folks. I guess is the 20,000 foot view of that one. Challenges. There were federal regulations this year, some air regulations that we've really been fighting. PFAS coming as an emerging contaminant has been a major issue for the entire country and probably the world, but that you'll hear more and more about that. And then funding and workforce issues. And then our goals for the coming year, we have a task order out now to do a third-party evaluation of our division to look for efficiencies and areas where we can deliver services better to the regulated community and the citizens of Kansas. We're gonna begin at the request of several municipalities. We're looking at developing regulations for the direct potable reuse of wastewater. We are promulgating the regulations to stabilize that hazardous waste fee fund. We are trying to, now that the administration has changed, we're trying to work toward, we will, be on the lookout for shifting to the new rules as they come out and adopting those. And then the PFAS work plan that we're working on for the state, that's another goal for us. And that's my presentation, so I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Kate. Questions of the committee? Representative Rogers.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Promulgating rules and regs, is that speeding up any? I know you always mentioned the one for that one, but I know there are other things it seems like. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I think Mr. Henning knows what I'm talking about. On some of these things, it seems like, we kind of play why things take so long. Are we making progress? And I mean, I understand we have to do a thorough investigation, but sometimes it seems like it takes an extraordinary amount of time. And then what is the challenge of why it does take that long?
That's a great question, Representative Precious. I don't think that we have seen evidence of it speeding up per se. On simpler packages, it goes through further, but some require a more in-depth evaluation of the regulations by certain approving bodies. I will say the hazardous waste regs, one of the reasons we have them in here for 2 years is because we believe they will trigger the legislative approval threshold. And so we don't really have a good sense of the time that will add to the process, but we anticipate it will add some time. So I guess the answer to my question is no. To your question is no.
Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do not know what PFAS is. I'm sorry, would you please explain that?
I don't want to say what the acronym stands for, but you will hear about it in the news, per and polyfluorinated chemicals, I can say that. But it is often referred to in the news as a forever chemical. It's in Teflon, it's in Gore-Tex, it's in Scotchgard. It's in a lot of stuff. It has been used widely in consumer products. And so it is both an issue from an industrial standpoint, but also from a everyday life standpoint. So we are looking at, the vectors of how that moves through the environment and the areas we need to address it in. And
Sorry, but I still don't understand what it does either. What is the concern? Because it's just something I've heard about.
it is a carcinogen. It also has some effects on reproductive health and a few other things. So it has, yeah, it's a human health issue.
Representative Roth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the Water Implementation Framework Enhancement Request, you mentioned a backlog for contamination remediation. How big is your backlog?
Our orphan sites backlog is 144 or so sites.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes. Representative White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To bounce off his question, contamination remediation enhancement request is 1 million. Now, is that water, drinking water, or is it, you did say at the end of that, it may go down into our groundwater. So is it necessarily lakes that are being used for drinking water right now, or is it all lakes, or?
It would typically be groundwater that we're talking about. So typically the contamination has been spilled on the ground, soil is contaminated, it moves to groundwater. The first thing we do when we find a contaminated site is evaluate whether or not folks are drinking it and find new sources of water for them if they are. So does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Chairman Rogers,
It's fine.
Representative Rogers.
I'm just nobody here. Okay, we go back to the infrastructure funding, state revolving loan fund. Just make sure, I guess, fully understand as we talk about drinking water, wastewater, so on, the amount and then the amount that's forgiven. So that's not really a revolving loan. It's more like a grant, correct? No. Explain the forgiveness and what does that mean for the dollars?
Yeah, it has typically been more of a revolving loan.
Yeah.
But because of the bill money we received, we were able to forgive a lot more principal. That money was specifically earmarked for principal forgiveness.
Okay, Madam Chair, that's what I wondered because I knew there was a revolving loan program. And so, Madam Chair, how, you think we're making some headway in some of this? I'm sure you'd like to have more money for the program and we'd get more, but are we making some headway in some of these communities?
Yes, I certainly think or communities that receive grants and loans are able to do the projects that need to be done. If you look back at the presentation Vijay made yesterday, it showed the number of communities that applied for money, and that was at the water office, but those are typically communities that can't afford to come and get loans from us. But we have the same issue, right? Folks are coming to us that they need loans and they may not be able to afford them, or it takes a long time to get them and do that sort of thing. So progress is being made, but it is slow.
Madam Chair, just again, my understanding, it has to do with this. So with these being forgiven, the loan volume is still available for loans, just the money was forgiven back, but you retained the money, is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly,
I think, and
the bill money that was sent to us for principal loan forgiveness, we do not get back. But the revolving loan portion, we do get back.
right.
It has to be replenished periodically by the federal government. That amount we're getting from the federal government is going down.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
and that was kind of, as we look at these programs it's almost like and I don't mean to drag this in, but it's some of those federal programs, they get started and then it eventually goes back down. And then if we're going to keep those at those levels, that's when the state has to come in. If we're going to keep those at those levels, or not necessarily this program per se, I'm looking at the general overall. So it's more of as we look at all these programs. So thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quickly, Luke, would you please address the governor's differences from the 25 and 26 budgets for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will. So the governor's changes, again, you all should have that handout available to you. The governor is recommending the Hazardous Waste Fund Stabilization, SGF, in 2025. She is also recommending $350,000 general fund for that Hazardous Waste Stabilization Fund in 2026. Other agency enhancement requests that the governor is recommending is for livestock waste management, $210,000, the KEAMS database implementation at $425,000, and then there are 4 additional items that were not included in the agency's initial budget requests, and that is those water plan fund items that were discussed. $500,000 for rural and private groundwater protection, $1 million for RAPS, $1 million for contamination remediation, and 1 FTE for that. And then water planning project development, 1 million and 6 FTEs for that, Madam Chair.
So let me run this back. These last 4 would be enhancements over and above the budget that we've been presented.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you to the Water Office for being here today, and also to the Department of Environment. And we will now go to the Department of Wildlife and Parks. So Luke, do you want to brief us on that budget, please?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I hope that the committee is not getting tired of my voice yet or my face on the screen. Yes, I have Department of Wildlife and Parks. I will note that Acting Secretary Kennedy is with the committee as well today and may be able to answer any questions or address the committee. Per standard is that front page there gives a brief agency overview along with actual expenditures, agency's requests for 25 and 26. The analysis will begin on page number 2. Again, I will point the committee to figure 4, the summary of the budget request for 25. The Wildlife and Parks does not typically receive general fund, but they do have some here as a reappropriation of about $5 million. Those are lined out down below on page number 3. That includes some monies for the Flint Hills Trail, dam repairs, shower house, building a new shower house at El Dorado State Park. I would note that the Legislative Budget Committee of those general fund reappropriations does recommend deleting $1.9 million for the dam repairs. Madam Chair, when you flip over onto page 3, item number 2, Economic Developments Initiatives Funds, the agency reappropriated about $248,000 in EDIF. Item number 3, the agency submits no supplemental requests. Economic Developments Initiatives Fund, the agency does request a lapse of about $200,000. So of some of that money that rolled over in EDIF, the agency is requesting lapse of some of that. I will note that is mostly found in the agencies, or entirely found in the agencies' lines of appropriation for veterans and National Guard hunting and fishing licenses. The majority of the EDIF that is used by the Department of Wildlife and Parks is for operating expenditures at state parks. Item number 5, federal raise grant. On August 11th, 2022, Federal Department of Transportation announced that KDWP was awarded some federal dollars for raise. More specifically, this is for the completion of capital improvement projects to complete the Flint Hills Trail. The Flint Hills Trail traverses several different counties in Kansas. A lot of the trail is open, but this federal raise grant over a period of years is estimated to allow the agency to finish that and open it up in its entirety to the public. Item number 6, at the bottom of page 3 and beginning on page 4, is Endangered Species Federal Fund. That's a $4 million from a federal initiative. The agency indicates this is pass-through, specifically for funding of whooping crane and eastern black rail recovery in 2025. As is seen in other agency budgets, these federal funds can change from year to year, award letters, etc. For this particular agency, you're seeing $4 million there for that Endangered Species Federal Fund. Item number 7, American Rescue Plan Act funds. The agency's request adds about $3.7 million in ARPA monies. I would note that those expenditures are attributable to the Sprint grant that was offered by the Department of Commerce. More specifically, that those funds are planned to be used for visitor centers located across the state, and those are listed there for the committee under bullet 7. The increase is attributable because for the agency rolling over previously approved ARPA monies for the projects. So that is to say that in its entirety, this is a $10 million award for those visitor centers at state parks. Item number 8, Outdoor Recreational Federal Fund. Not dissimilar to the discussion earlier on the Endangered Species Fund. $3.4 million is being added. It's federal funding for the creation and expansion of different parks, recreation facilities, and other local recreation plans. So that is to say that these entities would apply for funding from the KDWP, and then those would go out in the forms of grant to those different municipalities. Item number 9, Cabin Revenue Fund. The agency requests to add $1.6 million from the Cabin Revenue Fund in 25. The agency notes that estimated revenues and expenditures for the fund are increasing. They also would note that there are more usage. Cabins are pretty popular, Madam Chair, and they continue to remain popular with with those going to the state parks. They added at Perry, Lovewell, Clinton, and Pomona, and then a camping wagon at Scott. When you flip over to page 5, federal wildlife restoration, this is what you will hear with wildlife and parks from time to time, is you'll hear Pittman Robinson or Dingle Johnson. Federal wildlife restoration is Pittman Robinson. Those monies are federal funds that are used for wildlife conservation and restoration. The agency estimates reduced revenues and expenditures from that fund in 2025. Wildlife fee fund, there's a deletion of $2.2 million in the wildlife fee fund. Those funds are collected when folks go and buy their hunting license or their tags. That's what funds the wildlife fee fund. I would also note that the Federal Wildlife Restoration Fund, that Pittman Robinson, those funds are distributed based on some mathematical equations in regard to acreage in a state, along with the firearm sales, there's ammunition sales, things of that nature for that particular federal funding source. The agency does delete $2.2 million from the wildlife fee fund across most expenditure categories in 25. Item number 12, parks fee fund. The agency's request deletes $1.5 million. That's primarily attributable to capital outlay expenditures. Parks fee fund is funded through revenues received when folks get their parks pass, or they go and visit the parks and pay their daily park fees, camping fees, and that sort as well. Item number 13 at the bottom of page 5. This is another federal initiative. This one is the Dingle Johnson Act money. So this is for fishing. So when folks buy fishing tackle, line, etc., part of those monies are then put into the pot to be distributed to the states. The agency is estimating $1.4 million reduction in those revenues and expenditures in 2025. Madam Chair, on page 6 is the all other adjustments. So those items that are not listed above are included in item 14. That deletes about $800,000 and adds one FTE position in 2025. And that FTE position is in the administration program, and all those expenditure reductions across multiple agency programs and funding sources come out to be roughly a reduction of $800,000. Madam Chair, I can stand for questions, or I can move forward to 2026.
Committee questions on 25? Okay, let's go to 26.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 7 is the FY 2026 analysis. You will notice in figure 7, much of what was discussed above is further discussed here in 2026 as well. Item number 1 at the bottom of page 7 is enhancement requests. The agency did not submit any enhancement requests. Item number 2 on the top of page 8, federal raise grant, that adds $5.1 million. As noted before, this is a federal award that will be distributed to KDWP over time. And so you see those expenditures remain in the budget and increase in 2026. Federal wildlife restoration, again, the Pittman Robinson dollars, the agency does estimate for those revenues and expenditures to increase by $4.2 million in 2026. The agency's request maintains item number 4, that federal endangered species fund, that those revenues and expenditures will continue to come into the state in 2026. Item number 5, federal outdoor recreation. Again, those monies for the expansion of parks and recreation facilities that are estimated in 25 are estimated to continue into FY 2026. Item number 6 is cabin revenue fee fund. Again, those additions, the agency is estimating increased revenues and expenditures from the cabin revenue fund because of increasing demand for cabins in 2026. Item number 7, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. The agency's request deletes $6.3 million, and that is the agency is estimating to expend those ARPA dollars in 2025 and will not carry money into 2026. That's why you see that reduction there. Item number 8 on page 9 is Parks Fee Fund. The agency's request deletes $1.7 million from Park Fee Fund in 26, primarily attributable to different capital outlay expenditures. Item number 9, that federal sport fish, so those Dingell-Johnson Act monies. Madam Chair, when you flip over to page 10, you will see that that deletes $1.1 million, and that is for capital improvement projects in 2026. Wildlife Fee Fund at the top of page 10, item number 10, the agency's request deletes about $950,000 from the Wildlife Fee Fund. That's primarily attributable to commodities in 26. The all other adjustments, Madam Chair, which again are not those items that are listed above, includes a deletion of $214,000 across all other agency funds, across all other expenditure categories and programs. Also adds 1 FTE position in 2026. Madam Chair, I would note as well for the committee that here on page 10 at the bottom, you will see some reductions that was made by the LBC specifically to the Department of Wildlife and Parks operating expenditures for EDIF monies, a deletion of roughly $292,000 in 2026, a deletion of roughly $400,000 from park operations in 2026, and then an addition of $109 EDIF for National Guard and veteran licenses in 2026. Madam Chair, I could stand for questions for 26, or I'd briefly go over the capital projects for the Department of Wildlife and Parks.
Questions on 26? Okay, Representative Roth, kind of got a question.
Thank you, Chairman. On number 4, Federal Endangered Species Act, and maybe that's a question for the Secretary. It says that you're mainly working towards habitat for whooping crane and eastern black rail, and those are migratory birds. So would we need to be doing that for migratory birds that are just passing through?
Madam Chair, Representative, I would defer to the agency, to Acting Secretary Kennedy to answer that question.
Okay, we'll answer that one, and then tomorrow when we have the secretary, if you can come back tomorrow to do your part of this. Let's just hold that question for tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Roth. No, you're fine. Okay, any other questions on 26? If not, let's quickly go over the capital budget and debt. And then tomorrow we will have Secretary Kennedy to answer all the other questions. Go, Luke.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I won't read the different projects here for KDWP. Members of the committee will see on Figure 8 those capital projects, and as you can see, there's a number of them. A narrative down below shows you what those changes are. The only thing that I would note, Madam Chair, for the committee is that item number 4 on page 12. Also indicates or shows that deletion of $1.9 million general fund for dam maintenance, and that's where you would see that show up in their capital budget. Madam Chair, I would also note for the committee on page 13, item 10 is a discussion of the park's major maintenance, which is where you will see expenditures show for those Sprint dollars that have been awarded by the Department of Commerce. I would also note, Madam Chair, that the capital budget was heard by Building Committee today for the KDWP. No recommendations were made. Of those ARPA monies, it was clarified there that those monies need to be committed by Commerce by the end of the calendar year, but KDWP will have until roughly around the summertime of 2026 to get those dollars actually out the door. Finally, Madam Chair, I would note as well for the committee item 13 on page 14 of the budget summary is trails development, and that is where you will see some additional general fund that acts as the federal match in order to draw down those raised dollars. So that is to say that $3 million is the entirety of the state's match for those federal raise grants, and then that will allow for those federal raise dollars to flow into the state in the current year and in the out years as well. Madam Chair, if there are any questions on capital improvements, I can certainly answer those.
Committee questions on capital improvements. If not, if you have some, Luke will be back tomorrow with us. So with that, is there anything else that needs to come before the committee today? Representative Rogers?
Thank you. And Luke, if you're on the line, I would be curious if we have a breakdown of CapEx for all the parks. You know,
Madam,
it's,
I apologize, Representative. Madam Chair, I don't have a breakdown by each. The state has, we have 28 state parks. I can reach out to the agency and see if I can't get something together for the committee for tomorrow.
yeah, or they could bring something, either one. I'm curious. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, staff. Thanks, committee. We are adjourned.